Joseph was born into a large, complicated family. His father Jacob had many sons, and Joseph was one of the youngest. From the moment he could walk, there was something gentle and bright about him. His laughter filled the tents, and his eyes carried a light that his father never tired of seeing. Jacob loved him deeply, for Joseph had been born to him in his old age through Rachel, the woman he truly loved. As a boy, Joseph followed his father everywhere, asking questions about God, about the stars, about life. While the older brothers worked hard in the fields, Joseph often stayed close to Jacob, helping with small tasks, learning stories of their ancestors, and hearing about the promises God had given to Abraham and Isaac. He was curious, thoughtful, and honest. Too honest sometimes. Jacob noticed the boy's pure heart and made him a special coat, a robe woven in many colors, bright like the sunrise. When Joseph put it on, it shimmered in the light, and Jacob's eyes filled with pride. But his brothers' hearts turned bitter. They saw the favoritism, they saw the affection, and jealousy took root like a thorn growing deep in their souls. Even as a child, Joseph's mind was full of dreams. One night, he dreamed he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and his sheaf stood upright while the others bowed down to it. When he told them, they mocked him and said, "Will you indeed rule over us?" But Joseph meant no harm. He only wanted to share what he had seen. Another time, he dreamed the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to him. When he told this to his father, Jacob rebuked him gently, but inside, he wondered what it meant. When the brothers returned home after selling Joseph to the traders, the weight of what they had done hung heavy in the air. They carried the torn, blood-stained coat of many colors, the robe their father had lovingly made for his son. None of them spoke on the long walk back to their father's camp. Each step felt heavier than the last, and though the sun burned above them, an even greater heat of guilt burned within their hearts. When they reached home, Jacob came out to meet them, his face full of hope. "Where is Joseph?" he asked eagerly. "Did he find you well?" The brothers exchanged uneasy glances. Reuben could not meet his father's eyes. Finally, they held out the coat and said, "We found this. Look at it carefully. Is this your son's robe?" Jacob took it in his trembling hands. The familiar fabric was torn, the bright colors stained dark with blood. His breath caught, and his knees gave way. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." He tore his clothes in grief, put on sackcloth, and mourned deeply. His cries filled the camp for days and nights without end. No one could comfort him. His sons stood around him in silence, their hearts pierced with shame, but they could not confess the truth. They said nothing, only watched as their father's sorrow consumed him. Jacob refused food. He lay awake through the nights, whispering Joseph's name, remembering his laughter, his curious questions, the sound of his voice calling, "Father." The tent that once echoed with warmth now felt cold and empty. Rachel's memory came back to him, and the pain of losing her seemed to awaken again with even greater sorrow. Reuben tried several times to speak, to tell the truth, but fear silenced him. Judah, though proud, felt the sharpest sting of guilt. He had been the one who suggested selling Joseph instead of killing him. He thought it would ease his conscience, but it did not. Every time Jacob's eyes filled with tears, Judah's heart broke a little more. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The family carried on, tending the flocks, but the house no longer felt alive. Jacob grew older under the weight of grief. Every time he saw Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, he held him tighter, as though afraid that he, too, would be taken. "I cannot lose another son," he would whisper. Meanwhile, far away in Egypt, Joseph was learning a new life. Though he missed his home, he began to understand that his journey was part of something larger than himself. The memories of his father's face and the pain of betrayal would visit him in the quiet nights, but he did not let bitterness take root. He believed that somehow, God still had a plan. Back in Canaan, years continued to pass. The brothers tried to bury their guilt, to convince themselves that Joseph was gone and the matter was behind them, but peace never came. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the camp at night, they could almost hear their father's cries echoing, or they would dream of Joseph's eyes looking at them from the pit. When famine later struck the land, it forced them to remember the very thing they had tried to forget. They heard that Egypt had food and that a powerful ruler there was selling grain to people from every land. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that the man they would one day bow before, desperate for help, was the very brother they had betrayed. Their lie, buried for years under guilt and silence, was about to meet truth face to face. And the truth would not only expose them, it would change them. The famine spread across the lands like a shadow that refused to lift. The earth was dry, the wells were shallow, and hunger crept into every home. In Canaan, Jacob and his sons felt its grip as their food stores dwindled. The once green fields turned pale, and their flocks grew thin. One evening, Jacob gathered his sons and said, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." The brothers exchanged uneasy looks. Egypt. The word itself stirred memories they had long buried. It was to Egypt they had sent Joseph, bound and broken. Now fate, or rather God's unseen hand, was leading them back to that same land. 10 of them prepared for the journey, leaving Benjamin behind. Jacob refused to let him go, saying, "My son shall not go with you. His brother is dead, and he alone is left to me. If harm befalls him on the road, you will bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow." The 10 brothers set out, dusty and weary, their hearts heavy. The road to Egypt was long, but the fear of starvation drove them forward. When they finally arrived, the sight before them was unlike anything they had ever known. The city rose high with temples and walls carved in stone, the air filled with the scent of grain and incense. People from many nations crowded the streets, all waiting to buy food from Egypt's powerful governor. They entered the grand hall where he stood, a man dressed in fine linen, with gold upon his neck and authority in his voice. They bowed before him, faces to the ground, not knowing they were bowing before their own brother. Joseph looked down at them, and his breath caught. The sight of their faces, older, wearier, but unmistakable, struck him deeply. In that moment, the dreams of his youth flooded back. The sheaves bowing, the stars bending low. He recognized them instantly, but they did not recognize him. His Egyptian clothing, his shaved face, his foreign tongue, all hid the brother they had once sold. But instead of revealing himself, Joseph spoke sternly through an interpreter. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they answered, "to buy food." Joseph looked at them intently. "You are spies. You have come to see where the land is unprotected." They panicked. "No, my lord," they pleaded. "Your servants are honest men. We are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." Joseph's heart ached at those words. One is no more. They thought him dead. He hid his tears behind a cold expression. "As I have said," he replied, "you are spies. You shall be tested. Send one of you to fetch your youngest brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, and your words shall be proven." He put them all in custody for 3 days. The same pit they had once thrown him into now echoed through their memories. On the 3rd day, Joseph spoke again. "I fear God," he said. "Let one of you stay here in prison while the rest go and take grain for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified." The brothers looked at one another, and guilt spilled from their hearts. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they said. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this trouble has come upon us." They did not know that Joseph understood every word. They thought he spoke only Egyptian. He turned away from them and wept quietly, his heart breaking after all those years. When he composed himself, he chose Simeon to stay behind as a pledge and sent the others home with bags of grain. Secretly, he ordered that their money be returned in their sacks. When the brothers arrived home and found the silver, fear seized them. "What is this that God has done to us?" they whispered. They told their father everything that had happened, and that the governor demanded Benjamin's presence. Jacob's face grew pale. "You have bereaved me of my children," he cried. "Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you would take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Reuben offered his own sons as surety, saying, "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back." But Jacob refused. "My son will not go down with you. His brother is dead, and he alone is left." Weeks passed. The famine grew worse. The grain they brought from Egypt ran out, and hunger returned to their camp. Jacob's eyes, weary with sorrow, turned to his sons again. "Go back and buy us a little more food," he said. Judah spoke with quiet strength. "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send Benjamin with us, we will go. But if you will not, we cannot.'" Jacob's heart was torn. He loved Benjamin as deeply as he had loved Joseph. But at last, seeing no other way, he agreed. "If it must be so, then take gifts with you, some balm, honey, spices, and nuts. Take double the silver, for perhaps it was an oversight that the money was returned. And take Benjamin. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, that he may release your brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." And so they set out again, carrying their father's hope and the heavy burden of their guilt. None of them knew what awaited them in Egypt, that before long, their secret would be uncovered, their hearts would be laid bare, and forgiveness would come from the very one they had once betrayed. When the brothers reached Egypt once more, their hearts beat fast with fear and uncertainty. The grand halls of Pharaoh's city loomed above them, and memories of their first visit came rushing back. They carried gifts in their hands, spices, honey, almonds, and silver, and Benjamin walked quietly among them, unaware of the storm that awaited. When Joseph saw them approaching, his eyes immediately found Benjamin. The sight of his younger brother, the only one who had not betrayed him, struck him deeply. Benjamin was no longer a child. He had grown into a young man, strong and graceful, with the same gentle look Joseph remembered from long ago. In that instant, Joseph's heart melted. Yet he held his composure, speaking through his servants as if he were still a stranger. He ordered that the men be taken to his house and that a feast be prepared. The brothers were frightened when they were led there. They whispered among themselves, "We are being brought in because of the silver that was returned to our sacks. He means to accuse us and make us his slaves." When they tried to explain to Joseph's steward about the money, the man only smiled and said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your payment." Then he brought Simeon out to them, alive and well, and the brothers' hearts eased a little. When Joseph entered the house, they bowed before him again, just as in the dream he had seen as a boy. He asked kindly, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still alive?" "Your servant, our father, is alive and well," they answered. Then Joseph's eyes turned to Benjamin. "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" he said softly. And before he could stop himself, his voice trembled. "May God be gracious to you, my son." Overcome with emotion, Joseph quickly left the room. He found a private chamber and wept there, his shoulders shaking as years of pain and longing poured out. When he had composed himself, he washed his face and returned, his expression calm again. He ordered the meal to be served. The brothers were seated before him in order of their age, from the eldest to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. How could this man know the order of their birth? Food was brought to them from Joseph's own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than the rest. The brothers said nothing, too amazed to speak. That night, they ate and drank freely, unaware that Joseph was planning one final test to see whether their hearts had truly changed. Before they left, he instructed his steward, "Fill the men's sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's silver back in his bag. But in the youngest one's sack, place my silver cup, the one I drink from, and do it carefully." At dawn, the brothers set out on their journey home, grateful and relieved. But they had not gone far when Joseph's steward pursued them. "Why have you repaid good with evil?" he shouted. "Why have you stolen my master's silver cup?" The brothers were stunned. "Why would we do such a thing?" they cried. "Search our sacks, and if any of us has taken it, he shall die, and the rest will become your slaves." The steward began to search, starting from the oldest down to the youngest. When he opened Benjamin's sack, the silver cup gleamed inside. The brothers gasped in horror. They tore their clothes in anguish and fell to the ground. Their worst fear had come true. Benjamin, the one their father loved most, was now accused of theft. They returned to the city, their hearts heavy. When they were brought before Joseph, they fell to the ground once more. "What is this you have done?" Joseph demanded. "Do you not know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Judah spoke, his voice trembling. "What can we say, my lord? God has uncovered our guilt. We are now your slaves, we and the one in whose sack the cup was found." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found with the cup will remain my slave. The rest of you may go in peace to your father." A heavy silence filled the room. The brothers looked at one another, each remembering the day they had left Joseph in the pit. None of them could bear the thought of returning home without Benjamin. Judah stepped forward and fell before Joseph. "Please, my lord," he said, "let your servant speak a word to you. Our father loves the boy. He lost one son already, and his heart has never healed. If we return without Benjamin, it will kill him. Take me instead, I beg you. Let the boy go home to his father. I will remain as your slave forever." Joseph's chest tightened, his heart breaking at Judah's words. The brothers who had once sold him were now willing to sacrifice themselves for one another. It was the moment Joseph had waited for, the proof that their hearts had changed. He could hold back no longer. He sent all the servants out of the room. When they were gone, he wept aloud, so loudly that everyone in Pharaoh's palace heard him. Then he said to his brothers in their own language, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers froze in silence. Their faces turned pale with shock and fear. None could speak. Joseph stepped closer, tears streaming down his face. "Come near to me," he said. "Do not be afraid. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. But do not be angry with yourselves for what you did, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good." He embraced Benjamin first, weeping on his shoulder. Then he kissed each of his brothers, and they wept together. Years of guilt melted away in that moment. Forgiveness had triumphed over betrayal. Joseph sent word for his father to come to Egypt with all his household. Pharaoh, hearing the news, welcomed them gladly and offered them the best land in Goshen. When Jacob learned that Joseph was still alive, he was stunned. His heart, long weary with grief, came alive again. "My son Joseph is still alive," he said. "I will go and see him before I die." When Jacob finally arrived in Egypt, Joseph went out to meet him. As soon as he saw his father, he ran to him and embraced him tightly. They wept for a long time, father and son reunited at last after years of sorrow and distance. Jacob looked into Joseph's eyes and said, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face and know you are still alive." Time passed, and peace settled over the family. The land of Egypt provided shelter and abundance while the famine raged beyond its borders. Joseph continued to serve faithfully under Pharaoh, his wisdom guiding nations. Yet in quiet moments, he would sit beside his father, listening to stories of their homeland, of God's promises, and of the covenant that still awaited fulfillment. Though Joseph had risen, and still, his story was not finished, for God's promise to his people would continue through his sons, his brothers, and generations yet to come. When the years of plenty and famine had both passed, peace filled the land of Egypt once more. Jacob and his family lived safely in Goshen, surrounded by their herds and fields, protected by the power of Joseph and the favor of Pharaoh. The tents that had once been filled with sorrow now echoed with laughter again. Jacob grew old, his hair white as snow, his hands trembling, but his spirit strong. He would often sit beneath the shade of a fig tree, watching his children and grandchildren play. Joseph would visit him often, bringing his sons Manasseh and Ephraim to sit beside their grandfather. Jacob loved them dearly, seeing in them the continuation of the promise God had made to Abraham, that his descendants would become a great nation. One day, when Jacob's strength began to fade, word reached Joseph that his father was ill. He left his duties at Pharaoh's palace and hurried to Goshen with his sons. When Jacob heard that Joseph had come, he summoned all his remaining strength to sit up in bed. His eyes were dim, but when he saw Joseph, they filled with light. "My son," Jacob whispered, reaching out his frail hands. "God Almighty appeared to me in the land of Canaan and blessed me, saying, 'I will make you fruitful and multiply you.' Now I see that promise unfolding before my eyes." Joseph brought his sons forward to receive their grandfather's blessing. Manasseh, the elder, stood at Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim at his left. But as Jacob stretched out his hands to bless them, he crossed them, placing his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left on Manasseh's. Joseph gently tried to correct him. "Not so, my father," he said softly. "This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But Jacob refused. "I know, my son, I know," he said. "Manasseh will also become a people, and he too will be great. But his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." Then he blessed them, saying, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, bless the lads. May the angel who has delivered me from all harm bless these boys, and may they bear my name and the name of my fathers, and grow into a great multitude on the earth." Joseph bowed low, his heart full. He knew these words carried power, not just for his sons, but for all who would come after them. As Jacob's final days approached, he called all his sons to his bedside. The tent grew quiet as they gathered around him. One by one, he spoke words over each of them, prophecies, blessings, and warnings, telling them of the future that awaited their descendants. His voice was weak but filled with divine strength. When he came to Judah, he said, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until the one comes to whom it belongs, the one whom the nations will obey." None of them understood the full meaning then, but those words would echo through time, pointing toward the coming of a greater king yet to be born many generations later. Finally, when all the blessings were spoken, Jacob gathered his feet into the bed, drew a deep breath, and said, "I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave of Machpelah, in the land of Canaan." Then, peacefully, he breathed his last. A deep silence fell over the camp. Joseph threw himself upon his father and wept bitterly. The brothers stood around in grief, their hearts heavy with love and remembrance. Joseph ordered the physicians to embalm his father according to Egyptian custom, and the process took 40 days. The Egyptians mourned for 70 days, for Jacob was honored not only as the father of Joseph but as a patriarch of great wisdom. After the mourning period ended, Joseph sought Pharaoh's permission to carry his father's body back to Canaan, as Jacob had requested. Pharaoh agreed, saying, "Go, and bury your father as he made you swear." So Joseph set out with all his brothers, along with Egyptian chariots, officials, and soldiers. It was a great procession, so great that when they reached the borders of Canaan, the Canaanites said, "This is a solemn mourning for Egypt." They buried Jacob in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac rested, and after the burial, Joseph and his brothers returned to Egypt. But once they were back, fear crept into the hearts of Joseph's brothers again. They whispered among themselves, "Now that our father is dead, perhaps Joseph will repay us for all the wrong we did to him." They sent a message to him saying, "Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, 'Please forgive your brothers for the sin and the wrong they committed in treating you so badly.'" When the message reached Joseph, he wept once more. His brothers then came and fell before him, saying, "We are your servants." Joseph looked at them, his eyes filled with tears, and said, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he kept his promise, speaking kindly to them and comforting them. Years passed, and Joseph lived to see his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He often told them stories of his youth, of the coat of many colors, of dreams that came true, and of the power of forgiveness that mended what hate had broken. His sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, grew into strong tribes, blessed beyond measure. As Joseph grew old, he remembered the promise of God, that one day, his people would leave Egypt and return to the land promised to their fathers. Before his death, he gathered his family and said, "God will surely come to your aid and bring you up out of this land to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when he does, carry my bones from here." Then Joseph closed his eyes, full of peace. The same faith that had carried him through betrayal, slavery, prison, and power now carried him into eternity. His story had begun in a humble tent and ended in a palace, but the same hand of God had guided him all the way.